What happens when a place built to keep danger away from the world suddenly becomes easy for anyone to reach? In the middle of the Aral Sea, there was once an island so remote that it seemed almost designed to disappear from maps. No cities nearby, no tourists, no ordinary reason for a human being to ever set foot there. For decades, this island was surrounded by salt water, desert, secrecy, and a silence so heavy it felt intentional. Its name was Vozrozhdeniya Island. In Russian, it meant Rebirth Island. But what was happening there had nothing to do with rebirth. Because hidden on that island, tucked behind layers of Soviet military clearance, was one of the world's most secret biological weapons testing sites. A place where scientists turned nature into a weapon. A place where some of the most dangerous pathogens known to humanity were studied, tested, and prepared for war. Anthrax, plague, smallpox. For a long time, the water around the island acted like a wall. A natural barrier between the experiments and the rest of the world. But then, something strange began to happen. Something slow. Something unstoppable. The seas started to vanish. And year after year, the island was no longer an island. The wall was drying up. That is where this story stops feeling like Cold War history and starts feeling like a modern warning. Because when the water left, the secret stayed. And they weren't as dead as we hoped. Chapter 1. The Fortress of Biology. To understand why this matters, we have to look at why they chose this place in the first place. Vozrozhdeniya Island sat in the heart of the Aral Sea, between what are now Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. It was hot, dry, brutally isolated. In the 1930s, the Soviet military realized that if you were going to test something that could wipe out a city without firing a single bullet, you needed a place where the wind and the water worked for you. By the 1950s, the island became home to a top-secret complex known as Aralsk 7. To the outside world, it barely existed. But to the people living there, it was a specialized settlement called Kantubek. It had homes, schools, social clubs, families, a strange little town on a forbidden island. But just a few miles away, behind barbed wire, was the real reason the island mattered. The laboratory, the proving ground. They were not testing bombs here. They were not testing missiles. They were testing living weapons. The logic was terrifyingly simple. If a pathogen was released into the air, how far could it travel? How long could it survive under the sun? How would wind carry an invisible cloud of disease? And what would happen to anything standing in its path? On Vozrozhdeniya, they could find out. They used open-air test sites. Animals were reportedly placed at different distances from release points. Then bacteria or viruses were released into the air. Scientists would watch, record, measure, and learn exactly how effective a biological agent could be. The island's environment was the perfect prison. The climate was harsh. The soil was dry and sandy. And most importantly, the surrounding water made unauthorized access almost impossible. To the Soviet generals, Vozrozhdeniya was the perfect place to hide the unthinkable. But danger has a way of outlasting the plans that created it. Chapter 2. The Treaty and the Shadow Program. In 1972, the world seemed to take a step back from the edge. The Soviet Union, the United States, and dozens of other nations signed the Biological Weapons Convention. It was supposed to be a global promise. No more developing biological weapons. No more producing them. No more stockpiling them. On paper, the work at Aralsk 7 should have stopped. The labs should have been cleaned. The samples should have been destroyed. The scientists should have gone home. But the files tell a darker story. According to defectors and later reports, the Soviet biological weapons program did not simply disappear. It went deeper underground. Some reports describe modified strains of disease, pathogens made more stable, more resistant, more useful as weapons. And because Vozrozhdeniya was so remote, the work could continue in the shadows of the Aral Sea. A ghost program, hidden behind water, hidden behind military secrecy, hidden behind a map that most people would never think to question. And this is the unsettling part of the ripple. We know enough to understand the danger, but not enough to know everything. How many different strains were tested? How many experiments were carried out? How much material passed through that island? Even today, the full record is incomplete. It is like looking at a Cold War puzzle where some of the most important pieces were never made public. And the missing pieces may be the most dangerous ones. Chapter 3. The Vanishing Sea. While scientists were working behind fences and locked doors, the world outside the lab was changing. Not suddenly, not loudly, but permanently. In a massive Soviet engineering project, the rivers that fed the Aral Sea, the Amu Darya, and the Sir Darya were diverted to irrigate cotton fields in the desert. It was meant to be an agricultural victory, but for the Aral Sea, it was a death sentence. The water began to shrink. At first, it was just a slow retreat. Then the shoreline moved farther and farther. Ports that once touched water were left stranded in sand. Ships sat rusting in the middle of a new desert. The Aral Sea, once one of the largest lakes in the world, was collapsing. But on Vozrozhdeniya Island, this was not just an environmental disaster. It was a security nightmare. Because the entire safety logic of Aralsk, 7 depended on one simple fact. The island had to remain an island. The water was the gatekeeper. It kept outsiders away. It made the site difficult to reach. It separated the experiments from the mainland. But as the sea retreated, that gatekeeper began to disappear. The channel between the island and the mainland became narrower. The water became shallower. The barrier became weaker. And then, by 2001, satellite images showed the truth. The water channel was gone. Vozrozhdeniya had joined the mainland. The island had become reachable. The fortress had become an open door. Chapter 4. The Buried Threat. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the personnel at Aralsk, 7 left. The labs were closed. Buildings were dismantled. Kontubek was abandoned. A secret town became a ghost town, but they could not take everything with them. And they could not erase what had already been buried. In 1988, according to later reports, the Soviet military moved large quantities of anthrax material to Vozrozhdeniya Island. Anthrax is not like an ordinary threat. It can form spores, tiny, armored seeds of bacteria that can survive in soil for years, sometimes for decades. The material was reportedly treated with bleach and buried in pits in the island's soil. They thought they had neutralized it. They thought the earth would swallow the secret. They were wrong. Years later, when US specialists investigated the site and helped with cleanup efforts, they found something chilling. Despite the bleach, despite the time, despite the burial, viable anthrax spores were still there. The danger had not fully died. It had waited underground. This is where the internet rumors often get the story wrong. People imagine rusted canisters sitting on shelves. They imagine abandoned barrels leaking in dark Soviet corridors. That version is cinematic, but the better supported truth may be more haunting. The threat was not sitting in the open. It was in the dirt, invisible, silent, a microscopic ghost waiting under the former island. And now the island was no longer sealed away by water. Chapter 5. The Ripple in the Present. Today, Vozrozhdeniya is not really an island anymore. It is connected to the mainland. A place once protected by water became part of the dry world around it. Cleanup efforts in the early 2000s, led by the United States and Uzbekistan, targeted the known burial pits and dangerous structures. The most urgent known threats were addressed. But one question is harder to bury. Can anyone ever be completely sure they found everything? Because this was not a normal abandoned building. This was an island used for open-air biological testing for decades. A place where records were incomplete. A place where secrecy was part of the design. A place where the environment itself changed after the danger was left behind. There is also the unresolved question of a 1,971 smallpox outbreak in Aralsk. Some retrospective analysis suggests it may have been linked to open-air testing on the island, but the evidence is not complete enough to say for certain. And somehow, that uncertainty makes the story feel even heavier. Because Vozrozhdeniya is not just a story about what we know. It is a story about what we may never fully know. Chapter 6. The Secret That Outlived the Sea. The real lesson of Vozrozhdeniya Island is not just about Cold War villains. It is not just about secret labs. It is about a dangerous assumption. The belief that if you hide something far enough away, nature will keep it there forever. But nature changed. The rivers were diverted. The sea retreated. The island joined the mainland. And the secret stayed exactly where it was. That was the ripple. Not just the experiments. Not just the abandoned lab. Not just the buried anthrax. The ripple was the way one hidden decision moved outward through maps, rivers, governments, investigators, and finally into the soil itself. We build walls of water, but water can disappear. We bury secrets in the ground, but the ground remembers. The Aral Sea moved away, but the history remained. And as we keep finding abandoned sites around the world, the question becomes harder to ignore. What else is waiting for the maps to change? What else is waiting for the water to dry up? Vozrozhdeniya was a place named for rebirth. But its real legacy is a warning. In high-stakes history, nothing stays buried forever. The island disappeared from the water, but it never disappeared from the consequences. The ripple is still moving,